behind Hades himself on what might be the most unexpected vacation request in mythological history. You can almost feel the dry, mineral chill of the underworld brushing against your skin like the world's least enthusiastic air conditioner, while distant echoes drift like whispers in a cavern that never quite ends. It's quiet down here, too quiet, in that way that makes you wonder if silence itself is watching you. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes without checking your phone, and there's definitely no Wi-Fi, just eternal judgment and a faint smell of something ancient and slightly damp. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Because while you're listening, you're technically spending time in two places at once, which is already more impressive than anything Hades has done this week. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk beside Hades as he moves through his kingdom, his steps steady, unhurried, like someone who has all of eternity, which, to be fair, he does. The ground beneath you isn't exactly solid in the comforting sense. It feels more like memory given shape, shifting just enough to remind you that nothing here is truly alive or truly dead. Somewhere in the distance, the Cerberus lets out a low, bored growl, the kind that says, "I could guard this gate forever, but I'd really rather not." Here's the thing most people forget. Hades isn't the villain of Greek mythology. That title gets thrown around like confetti at a very gloomy party. In fact, one widely known detail is that Hades rarely leaves the underworld at all. He's one of the most consistent gods, which is impressive considering his siblings tend to treat responsibility like a suggestion rather than a rule. And yet tonight, something feels different. He pauses. Not dramatically. Hades isn't the dramatic type, despite what you might expect, but just enough for you to notice. His gaze drifts upward toward a sky that doesn't exist here, as if he's remembering something he hasn't seen in a very long time. Light, maybe, or the concept of weekends. "Strange," he murmurs, mostly to himself. You don't respond, because talking to a god of the dead feels like the kind of thing that would definitely void your warranty as a human being. Instead, you listen. There's a historical or mythological detail that slips into your mind as you watch him. According to ancient Greek belief, Hades' realm wasn't a place of constant torment for everyone. Most souls simply existed there, in a kind of neutral afterlife, neither rewarded nor punished. It's less eternal screaming and more eternal waiting room, which somehow feels worse if you've ever been stuck at the DMV. Hades exhales, and it sounds like wind moving through stone corridors that have never known warmth. "I have not left," he says slowly, "in a very long time." That might be the understatement of the millennium. You notice something else, something oddly human. There's a hint of fatigue, not the kind that comes from lack of sleep, because gods don't really do that, but the kind that comes from doing the same job in the same place with the same silence for longer than most civilizations have existed. And here's a lesser-known detail. In some ancient traditions, people were so afraid of invoking Hades' attention that they avoided saying his name altogether, calling him Plauton, meaning the wealthy one, because he ruled over all the riches beneath the earth. It's a bit like calling your strict boss the generous one and hoping for a raise. You shift slightly, the air around you cool and still. Hades turns, just enough for his presence to settle over you. Not heavy, exactly, but undeniable. "I think," he says, as if testing the idea for the first time, "I will leave." There's a pause. If this were a modern situation, this would be the moment someone would spit out their coffee in disbelief. You don't have coffee, unfortunately, which is probably for the best because spilling anything in the underworld feels like it would come with paperwork. Leave? Gods don't take vacations. Not in the way you're thinking. And yet, here he is. You follow as he begins to walk again, this time with a subtle shift in direction, toward the edge of his domain, toward the unseen boundary where the underworld brushes against the world above. The path feels different here, thinner somehow, like the fabric between realms has been worn smooth by time. Somewhere behind you, Cerberus whines softly, all three heads tilting in mild confusion, like a dog realizing its owner just picked up car keys at an unusual hour. You glance back, and for a moment, you swear one of those heads looks offended, which is fair. Imagine guarding the gates of the dead for eternity and then suddenly being told, hey, I'm stepping out for a bit. Historians still debate whether the Greeks imagined physical entrances to the underworld, caves, rivers, deep chasms, or whether it was more symbolic, a boundary that couldn't truly be mapped. But walking here now, you'd say it feels very real and very easy to cross if you happen to be a god, slightly less easy if you're you. Hades stops again, just before that invisible threshold. For a moment, everything is still. Then, in a tone so calm it's almost unsettling, he says, I will need a break. You blink. A break. From ruling the dead. It's the kind of sentence that feels like it should trigger thunder, earthquakes, or at the very least, a strongly worded memo from Olympus. But instead, there's only silence, and the faint, distant sound of souls continuing their quiet existence, completely unaware that their king is considering clocking out for the first time in, well, ever. You can't help but think, if Hades is taking a vacation, what does that even look like? Does he sit on a beach? Does he try a fruit smoothie and immediately regret it? Does he accidentally terrify a group of unsuspecting fishermen? All of the above seems possible. And as you stand there, on the edge of the underworld, you realize something quietly extraordinary. You're about to follow the god of the dead on holiday. Section 2. You remain there beside him at the edge of that almost not there boundary, where the underworld thins into something lighter, like a memory fading into morning. Hades doesn't rush. He never rushes. If anything, he studies the idea of leaving the way a person might study a door they've owned for years but never opened. Half curious, half suspicious, it might lead to something inconvenient, like fresh air and responsibilities of a different kind. He tilts his head slightly, as if listening to something far away. Not voices, those are everywhere down here, but something quieter. Possibility, maybe, or the faint hum of sunlight, which, if you think about it, is probably the least underworld-compatible sound imaginable. You will come, he says, not really asking. And just like that, you're apparently part of a divine vacation plan. No paperwork, no warning, no, are you available next week? Which honestly feels very on brand for ancient gods. Their scheduling system is best described as vibes. But there's a problem, a very large thunderbolt-wielding problem. If Hades leaves even temporarily, he needs permission from Zeus now. In one of the more well-known moments of Greek mythology, Zeus is the ruler of the gods, the sky, and unofficially the family group chat that nobody can mute. He's not exactly famous for approving unusual requests without at least a little drama. And yet, tradition matters. Even Hades, who rarely interacts with Olympus, follows certain boundaries. You begin to move again, not upward exactly, but along a path feels like it leans toward the world above. The air shifts. It's still cool, but less heavy, like someone cracked open a window somewhere far away. As you walk, you remember something odd, an obscure detail historians still discuss. In ancient Greek belief, the division of the world between Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades wasn't based on personality, but on chance. They drew lots. Imagine deciding who rules the sky, sea, and underworld with something essentially equivalent to cosmic rock, paper, scissors. And Hades got the underworld. Some scholars argue he didn't resent it. Others think he absolutely did, but handled it with the emotional expression of a very patient statue. You glance at him now, still calm, still unreadable. If he's annoyed about losing that ancient lottery, he's had a few thousand years to process it. The path curves, and suddenly the ground beneath you feels less like memory and more like earth, real earth. There's a subtle scent now, dry soil, faint minerals, and something else you almost forgot existed, warmth. Hades pauses again, looking ahead. Olympus, he says simply. There's no visible mountain yet, but you feel it, a presence, bright, distant, slightly intimidating in the way that overly confident people at a party can be. You follow him as he continues, and you can't help but imagine how this conversation is going to go. Hello, brother. I'd like to take a vacation from managing the souls of the dead. Yes, that should go smoothly. As if reading your thoughts, which is entirely possible and mildly concerning, Hades exhales softly. He will not understand, he says. That might be the most relatable sentence a god has ever spoken. You keep walking, and the environment changes subtly again. The shadows thin. The silence becomes less absolute, replaced by distant sounds, wind maybe, or something alive moving somewhere far above. Here's another lesser-known detail. Despite ruling over the dead, Hades was actually considered one of the more fair and stable gods. Unlike Zeus, who had a habit of turning into various animals for complicated reasons, Hades mostly stayed in his lane, managed souls, maintained order, avoided unnecessary chaos, which makes this whole vacation idea feel even more unusual. You reach a place where the path opens slightly, and for a moment there's something like light. Not full sunlight, but a diluted version, as if it's passing through layers of existence to reach you. Hades stops. "This is far enough," he says. "You're not going all the way to Olympus physically. That would be too simple." Instead, he raises one hand, and the space in front of him shifts, like heat rippling above a road, except cooler, more controlled. A connection. And then, without any dramatic buildup, no thunder, no lightning strike time for cinematic effect, the presence of Zeus arrives. You don't see him fully, not the way you see Hades. It's more like standing near a storm that hasn't decided whether it wants to happen yet. There's pressure in the air, energy, the subtle feeling that if this conversation goes badly, you might be turned into something decorative. "Hades," comes the voice, steady, resonant. "Zeus." They greet each other like coworkers who haven't spoken in centuries but are pretending that's completely normal. There's a pause. You can almost hear the unspoken question. "Why are you calling me?" Hades doesn't waste time. "I will be leaving the underworld. Briefly." Silence. If silence had weight, this one would be heavy enough to require structural support. "Leaving," Zeus repeats. It's not a question. It's more like he's trying to understand the concept itself. "Yes." Another pause. You shift slightly, suddenly very aware that you are standing in the middle of a divine conversation that has absolutely no HR department. "For what purpose?" Zeus asks. Hades considers this. And then, in the calmest tone imaginable, he says, "Rest." There it is. The word hangs in the air like it's never been used before in this context. Now, here's something historians still debate. Did the Greek gods experience fatigue in a human sense, or were their needs more symbolic? Some interpretations suggest gods didn't tire physically, but could grow weary in a more abstract way, of repetition, of responsibility, of eternity itself. Looking at Hades now, you'd say, that tracks. Zeus doesn't respond immediately. You imagine him up there on Olympus, possibly blinking in slow, thunder-filled confusion. "Rest," he repeats again, as if testing the word for structural integrity. "Yes." There's a faint rumble, not quite thunder, more like the idea of thunder. "And the underworld? It will remain." That's technically true. It's not like the entire realm will just close for maintenance. Souls will still arrive. Rivers will still flow. Cerberus will still guard the gate, though probably with increasing emotional distress. You almost expect Zeus to object immediately, to say no, to demand explanations, schedules, contingency plans. Instead, there's another long pause. And then, "Very well." You blink. That was surprisingly easy. Hades inclines his head slightly, which coming from him is basically a full emotional speech. "I will return. I expect that you will." The presence fades. The pressure lifts. The connection dissolves like mist. And just like that, it's done. You stand there for a moment, processing. Hades turns, already beginning to walk back toward the boundary. Well, you think, that was anticlimactic. Which, honestly, makes it even funnier. No lightning bolts, no dramatic refusal, just a slightly confused approval from the king of the gods. You follow Hades again, and this time there's a subtle difference in his movement. Not faster, he doesn't do fast, but lighter. As if something invisible has shifted. He's really doing this. He's leaving. And as you approach that thin, shimmering edge between worlds once more, you can't help but feel a quiet sense of anticipation, because next comes the truly difficult part. Figuring out what a god of the dead even packs for a vacation. Section 3. You follow him back toward the deeper halls, not because he's changed his mind, but because apparently even a god of the dead cannot leave without packing, which feels oddly comforting. No matter how powerful you are, you still forget things like extra cloak or existential dignity. The underworld receives him the same way it always does, quietly, without ceremony, like a workplace that assumes you'll never take a day off. The air settles around you again, cool and still, carrying that faint mineral scent you're beginning to recognize as home base for eternity. Hades moves through corridors carved from something older than stone, and you notice how everything here is organized, not neatly exactly, but deliberately. Souls drift in distant fields, rivers flow along their endless routes. Nothing chaotic, nothing rushed. It's less like a realm of punishment and more like an ancient system running on autopilot. A very gloomy autopilot. And here's a well-known detail that slides into your mind as you walk. The underworld wasn't just one place. It had regions, like Elysium for the blessed, the Asphodel Meadows for ordinary souls, and Tartarus for punishment. Think of it as a very serious afterlife zoning plan, except there's no appeal process. Hades steps into a chamber that feels more personal. Not cozy, this is still the underworld, but quieter, more contained. If this were a modern apartment, you'd call it minimalist, although the lack of windows might hurt the resale value. He pauses near a stone surface that serves as something between a table and a reminder that furniture design was not a priority in ancient myth. I will need, he begins, then stops. You wait. Items. That's it. That's the plan so far. You nod internally because, yes, items are generally helpful when traveling. He reaches for the first object, a dark, almost weightless helm. The helm of darkness swirls. When he lifts it, the air around it seems to bend slightly, as if reality itself would prefer not to acknowledge it. A widely known mythological detail, this helm grants invisibility, and it was even loaned out to other heroes, because apparently divine artifacts sometimes come with a sharing is caring policy. Hades studies it for a moment. You will not be necessary, he says quietly, setting it aside. You blink again. He's choosing not to be invisible. That feels bold, or perhaps mildly concerning for anyone he encounters later. Next, he reaches for something less expected, a small pouch filled with what looks like dark seeds, pomegranate seeds. Ah, now that's significant. In Greek mythology, Persephone eating pomegranate seeds is what bound her to the underworld for part of each year. A snack with consequences, basically. The kind of thing that would come with a very aggressive warning label if sold today. Hades turns the pouch in his hand, thoughtful. Perhaps, he murmurs. He keeps them. You make a mental note not to accept any fruit from him later, just in case this turns into a legally binding situation. He continues, selecting items with quiet precision. A cloak, not flashy, just deeply, almost impossibly dark. A staff that hums faintly with authority. And, somewhat surprisingly, a small, smooth stone. You tilt your head. The stone doesn't look magical. It looks ordinary. Noticing your attention, Hades says, from the first boundary, which is somehow more mysterious than helpful. Historians still debate whether objects like these, tokens from mythological first places, were symbolic or believed to hold real power. Either way, you suspect this stone matters in a way that doesn't require explanation. Then comes the part you didn't expect. He hesitates, just for a moment. And then he looks toward the entrance of the chamber, where a distant, familiar presence lingers. Before you even turn, you hear it. The soft padding of enormous paws, followed by 3 slightly out-of-sync breaths. Cerberus has arrived. All 3 heads peer in, each with a different expression. One curious, one suspicious, and one that looks like it just realized its boss might be leaving without filing the proper forms. Cerberus lets out a low whine. It's not threatening, it's concerned. You didn't think a 3-headed guardian of the dead could look emotionally vulnerable, but here you are. Hades regards him calmly. I will be gone, he says. Cerberus freezes. All 3 heads blink. Then, in what might be the most relatable reaction in the underworld, he sits down heavily, like a dog who just heard the word vet. You almost laugh, but softly, because laughing too loudly near mythological beings feels like a risk. Here's a lesser-known detail. Despite his fearsome reputation, Cerberus wasn't just a monster. In many stories, he's simply doing his job, guarding the gates, preventing the dead from leaving and the living from entering. Loyal, consistent, and apparently not a fan of sudden schedule changes. Hades steps closer and places a hand, just briefly, on one of Cerberus's heads. You will remain, he says. Cerberus huffs, which for a creature of legend is basically a full emotional speech. You can't help but think, this might be the first time in eternity that Cerberus has had to deal with separation anxiety. There's probably no mythological guidebook for that. Hades turns back to his preparations, as if the matter is settled. You glance between them. This is going to go great, you think, in the same tone people use when they absolutely do not believe that. He gathers the selected items, minimal but deliberate. No overpacking. No, just in case I need 5 different cloaks. Hades travels light, which makes sense when you've been wearing essentially the same outfit for thousands of years. As he finishes, the chamber feels different. Not emptier exactly, but expectant. Like the underworld itself is aware that something unusual is about to happen. You remember another historical curiosity. The Greeks often left offerings to appease Hades, not out of affection but respect, and a healthy amount of fear. Black animals, especially, were sacrificed in his honor, a detail that feels both fascinating and like it would definitely not pass modern ethical review. Hades pauses one last time, looking around. Not with nostalgia, he's not that kind of god, but with recognition. This is his domain, and he's about to leave it. He turns towards you. It is time. You nod, because at this point, what else are you going to do? You follow him once more through the winding passages, past the silent fields and slow-moving rivers, back toward that thin, shimmering boundary. Cerberus watches from a distance, all 3 heads tracking your movement, like a very large, very mythological security system trying to process an unexpected update. As you approach the edge, the air begins to change again, lighter, warmer, carrying hints of something alive. Hades steps forward, and this time he doesn't stop. You feel it the moment you cross. The shift. The weight of the underworld loosens, replaced by something brighter, sharper, almost overwhelming, light. Real light. Hades pauses just beyond the boundary, and for the first time you see it clearly. He's not entirely comfortable here. Not afraid, just unfamiliar. Which, honestly, is fair. Imagine spending thousands of years in controlled darkness and then suddenly stepping into full daylight. It's basically the world's longest adjustment period. He looks ahead, toward a world that is very much alive. Strange, he says again. You nod, because this is where the vacation actually begins, and already it feels like things are about to get interesting. Section 4. You step fully into the world of the living beside him, and it feels like walking into a completely different kind of silence. One that isn't empty, but full of distant wind brushing through dry grass, full of insects humming like tiny, overachieving musicians, full of warmth pressing gently against your skin like sunlight that has somewhere to be. Hades stops almost immediately. Not dramatically. He still doesn't do dramatic, but long enough for you to notice the subtle shift in his posture. The light touches him, and for a brief second it seems unsure whether it's allowed to. This is brighter, he says. That might be the most polite way anyone has ever reacted to the sun. You squint slightly, because after the underworld's eternal dimness, even normal daylight feels like someone turned the brightness settings up to aggressively cheerful. Hades, meanwhile, studies everything with calm intensity, like a traveler who has just arrived in a country where even the concept of color feels suspicious. A breeze passes, carrying the scent of salt. Ah, the sea. You follow him along a gentle slope until the land opens up. And there it is, the wide, endless stretch of water shimmering under the sky. It's almost too alive. Waves roll in slow, steady rhythms, like the earth itself is breathing. Hades watches them. They do not stop, he says. No, you think, they don't. Here's a widely known detail. The ancient Greeks had a deep relationship with the sea. It was central to travel, trade, and myth. The god Poseidon ruled it, and he was not exactly known for his calm temperament. Storms, earthquakes, sudden mood swings. It's like the ocean had its own emotional playlist. You glance at Hades. Strangely, he seems comfortable here. Not because the sea is peaceful, it isn't, but because it is consistent, predictable in its unpredictability. Always moving, always returning. Kind of like the underworld, just with better lighting and significantly fewer existential crises per square meter. He steps closer to the shoreline. The waves reach out, brushing the edge of his sandals before retreating, as if testing him. You half expect the water to recoil dramatically, like, nope, not touching that, but instead, it behaves normally, which is somehow more surprising. Hades tilts his head. Alive, he says. You nod. That's one way to put it. Another might be overwhelmingly, relentlessly alive. He watches a wave break, foam spreading across the sand in delicate patterns before dissolving. You notice something. His expression hasn't changed much, but there's a subtle softness there. Not joy exactly, but curiosity without the usual weight of responsibility. And then, because this is apparently happening, he sits down, right there, on the sand. You blink. The god of the dead is sitting at the beach. If anyone from Olympus could see this, there would absolutely be gossip. You sit too because at this point you're committed to the experience. The sand is warm beneath you, tiny grains shifting as you settle in. It's such a simple sensation, but after the cold stillness of the underworld, it feels almost luxurious. Hades reaches down, letting the sand run slowly through his fingers. It does not remember, he says. You glance at him. In the underworld, everything feels like memory, shaped by it, held together by it. But here the sand doesn't hold on to anything. It shifts, changes, forgets. That seems to intrigue him. Here's a lesser-known detail. While Hades ruled over the dead, he was also associated with the hidden wealth of the earth, minerals, precious stones, things buried and unseen. In a strange way, sitting here on a beach surrounded by countless tiny fragments of rock, he's still within his domain. Just a more relaxed version of it. You notice a group of distant figures walking along the shore, humans. They're laughing, loudly, unnecessarily loudly if you're being honest. Hades watches them, expression unreadable. They are unaware, he says. Of you? You think. Of everything, he clarifies. Fair. You can't help but smile slightly. Humans have always been good at that. Being blissfully unaware of cosmic realities while arguing about things like whose turn it is to carry the water jar. Historians still debate how much ancient Greeks truly feared the gods versus simply respecting them as powerful forces. But watching these people now, you'd say, it depends on the day. And whether a god is currently sitting 10 meters away pretending to be a very serious tourist. A child runs past, chasing something invisible, maybe a game, maybe imagination. For a split second, they glance toward Hades, and then they keep running. No screaming, no sudden realization, just life continuing. You almost expect Hades to react, to say something about how mortals should recognize him, or at least sense his presence. Instead, he simply watches. Efficient, he says. You raise an eyebrow. He gestures faintly toward the humans. They continue, regardless. That might be the most Hades-approved compliment possible. The sun shifts slightly overhead, and you realize time feels different here. Not slower, not faster, just measurable. In the underworld, time feels like an idea. Here it moves. You stretch your legs, the warmth of the sand seeping in. Hades remains still, observing. Then, after a moment, he does something unexpected. He lies back, just lies back on the sand. You stare. If Zeus could see this, there would be at least one thunderbolt thrown purely out of confusion. Hades looks up at the sky. Blue, vast, endless in a completely different way than the underworld. It is open, he says. You follow his gaze. Yeah, that's one word for it. Another might be slightly overwhelming, especially if you've spent millennia under a ceiling that definitely doesn't do this. A seagull cries overhead. Hades flinches, very slightly. You try not to laugh because, yes, the god of the dead is mildly startled by a bird. To be fair, it's a loud bird, a very confident bird. Probably thinks it owns the place. You clear your throat, pretending that didn't happen. Hades sits up again, composure fully restored, as if he did not just have a brief existential moment courtesy of local wildlife. Unpredictable, he says. You nod. Welcome to vacation, you think. The waves continue their steady rhythm. The humans continue their distant laughter. The sky stretches on, indifferent and enormous. And for the first time since you met him, Hades does nothing. No ruling, no judging, no maintaining the balance of souls. He just sits. And somehow that might be the strangest thing of all, because the God who governs eternity has finally paused. Section 5. You sit there with him as the rhythm of the waves settles into something almost hypnotic, like a slow, steady heartbeat that belongs to the entire world. Time drifts, not disappears like in the underworld, but softens, stretches, becomes something you can float on rather than measure. Hades hasn't moved much, which, to be fair, is still more movement than his usual schedule. A breeze rolls in again, carrying that same salty scent, and you notice how it shifts the edge of his cloak slightly. It's a small thing, but it feels important. In the underworld, nothing really moves unless it has a reason. Here, everything moves for no reason at all. Unstructured, he says. You nod. That's a polite way of saying chaotic, but in a pleasant way. A well-known historical detail drifts into your thoughts. Ancient Greeks often visited coastal areas not just for trade, but for rest and ritual. While the idea of a vacation wasn't quite the same as today, people did travel to sanctuaries and seaside locations for healing and reflection. So technically, Hades sitting on a beach isn't completely out of place, just extremely unexpected. He leans forward slightly, watching the water again. You do this, he says. It takes you a second to realize he means humans. Yes, you think. We sit, we stare at water, we call it relaxing. He considers that. For how long? You hesitate. Hey, too long sometimes, you admit silently. He nods, as if that confirms something important about humanity. Nearby, a small group of people has gathered closer to the shoreline. One of them is attempting to skip stones across the water with the confidence of someone who absolutely does not know what they're doing. The stone hits the surface once, then immediately sinks. You watch Hades watch this. Inefficient, he says. You almost laugh. There's your second joke of the day, delivered in the driest tone imaginable. Another attempt. This one slightly better. 2 skips. The humans cheer like they've just invented mathematics. Hades tilts his head. They celebrate small successes. You nod again. Yes, it's kind of our thing. He seems to file that away like a mental note for future reference. Humans enjoy mediocre achievements. Historians still debate how much leisure time ancient Greeks actually had, depending on their status. Some argue that only the wealthy could truly relax, while others believe moments of rest were woven into daily life. Either way, watching these people now, you'd say they fully committed to the concept. A child approaches the water, hesitates, then runs back as a wave gets too close. You glance at Hades. He's watching with that same quiet focus. They retreat, he observes, and return, you add. Right on cue, the child runs forward again, slightly braver this time. Hades nods slowly. Predictable. There's something comforting about that word coming from him. You shift your position, stretching your arms back into the sand. It's warmer now, the sun having settled in overhead like it's decided to stay for a while. Hades notices. The warmth does not diminish, he says. Not quickly, you think. In the underworld, temperature doesn't really change. It's just consistently cool. Here, warmth builds, lingers, presses gently against everything. He lifts his hand slightly, as if feeling the sunlight more directly. Persistent, he adds. That might be his third observational joke, if you count it. The god of the dead, reviewing sunlight like it's a slightly overenthusiastic coworker. You glance toward the horizon. The sea stretches endlessly, meeting the sky in a line so clean it almost looks intentional. For a moment, everything feels balanced. And then, a loud shout. You both turn. One of the humans has spotted something. More shouting, excited this time. You follow their gaze and see it. A small fishing boat returning, nets heavy, movement purposeful, a common sight probably, routine, but not for Hades. They harvest from it, he says, watching carefully. Yes. Another widely known detail, fishing was a major part of ancient Greek life, especially in coastal communities. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Survival, not spectacle. Hades studies the boat, from something that does not belong to them. You pause. That's a very underworld way of phrasing it. But he's not wrong. Humans take, use, adapt. He doesn't seem judgmental, just observant. A gull swoops down toward the water, snatching something small before lifting away again. Hades watches it closely. That one is efficient, he says. You smile. Of course he'd respect the bird now. Character development. The boat reaches the shore and the humans begin unloading their catch, voices overlapping, energy rising. It's messy, loud, completely alive. And in the middle of all that, Hades remains still, not disconnected, just separate. You realize something then. He isn't here to become part of this world. He's here to experience it, like someone visiting a place they'll never truly belong to, but still want to understand him. He's watching everything, the waves, the people, the sky, with the same steady attention he gives to souls in the underworld. But there's a difference. No judgment, no responsibility, just observation, and maybe, just slightly, appreciation. A pause stretches between you, comfortable, unhurried. Then after a while he speaks again. This is sufficient. You blink. That sound, but also not. More like he's acknowledging something rather than concluding it. The waves continue their rhythm. The humans continue their laughter. The sun continues its slow, patient arc across the sky. And you sit there beside the god of the dead, on a beach that doesn't care who he is, realizing that this quiet, simple moment might be the closest thing to peace he's ever allowed himself to have. Section 6. You remain there with him as the shoreline slowly shifts from lively to gently scattered, the earlier crowd thinning out like a conversation that has naturally come to an end. The fishermen have gone. The stone skipper has either improved dramatically or wisely given up. Even the overly confident seagull has moved on to harass someone else's lunch, which leaves you Hades and a few lingering humans who haven't quite decided whether to stay or go. This is where things get interesting, because while Hades has been observing quietly, the world of the living has not been ignoring him entirely. At first it's subtle, a glance that lingers a second too long, a pause mid-conversation, the faint narrowing of eyes that says, I don't know why, but that guy feels intense. You look at Hades. To be fair, he does stand out. Dark cloak, unmoving posture, the kind of presence that makes even sunlight feel like it should lower its volume out of respect. He's not trying to blend in. He just isn't blending. A woman walking along the shore slows slightly as she passes, her gaze flicking toward him. She doesn't stop, but her expression shifts, curiosity mixed with something harder to name. Unease, maybe, or recognition without understanding. Hades notices. They sense, he says quietly. Not clearly, you think. No, he agrees. Here's a widely accepted idea in ancient Greek belief. Mortals were thought to have an instinctive awareness of the divine, even if they couldn't fully perceive it, a kind of subtle recognition, like hearing a distant echo and knowing it means something, even if you can't explain what. Watching these people now, you can see it. They don't know who he is, but they know he's not like them. A young man approaches the shoreline, carrying a basket. He hesitates as he passes closer to Hades, shifting slightly to give him space, more space than necessary, like avoiding a stranger who feels just a little too quiet. Hades watches him. They adjust, he says. Yes, you think. We do that a lot. Humans are very good at navigating discomfort without addressing it directly. It's practically a survival skill. The man continues on, glancing back once, then quickly looking away as if caught doing something impolite. You almost feel bad for him. Imagine going for a peaceful walk and accidentally encountering the literal god of the dead just sitting there like he's waiting for a bus that never comes. Hades shifts slightly, turning his attention to a different group now approaching from the distance. 3 travelers, judging by their clothing and the dust on their sandals. They're talking, loudly, confidently. One of them gestures toward the sea, clearly explaining something with the certainty of someone who has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. You glance at Hades. He's watching them with what might be the closest thing to amusement you've seen so far. They believe they understand, he says. You smile. That's kind of our default setting. Historians still debate how much ancient Greeks believed they truly understood their world versus accepting mystery as part of life. But judging by this man's enthusiastic explanation of something vaguely related to waves, you'd say confidence often came before accuracy. The travelers get closer, too close. One of them finally looks directly at Hades and stops, just stops. The conversation behind him stumbles, then halts entirely. There's a moment, a quiet, suspended moment where instinct overrides logic. Friend, the man says carefully, voice just slightly strained, are you traveling? You freeze internally. Oh no, we're doing this. Hades turns his head toward him, calm, unblinking. Yes, that's it. No elaboration, no fake name like Dave from somewhere not ominous. Just yes. The man nods slowly, as if that somehow answered more than it actually did. From where? He asks. You resist the urge to step in, which you absolutely cannot do because, again, you are not technically supposed to be here. Hades considers the question. The South, he says, which is technically correct. The most southern possible interpretation, really. You almost admire the precision. The man nods again, clearly unsure how to proceed. Well, welcome, he says with the energy of someone trying very hard to be polite to a situation they do not understand. Thank you, Hades replies. The conversation ends there. Not dramatically, just gently dissolving like most human conversations that don't know where they're going. The travelers move on, a little faster than before. You watch them go. That went well, you think. Hades doesn't respond, But there's a faint shift in his expression, something subtle, almost like satisfaction, as if he just completed a task he's never had to do before. Small talk. Successfully. That might be the most impressive feat of the entire Underworld administration. A breeze passes again, and the shoreline grows quieter still. Fewer people now, more space, more calm. Hades leans back slightly, returning his gaze to the sea. "They are manageable," he says. You laugh softly. That's high praise, very high praise. You stretch your legs again, feeling the warmth of the sand, the steady rhythm of the waves, the gentle hum of a world that continues without asking permission. And then a thought, a small one, but persistent. You glance at Hades. Is this enough, you wonder? A single beach, a few hours of observation, a handful of awkward human interactions. For a god who has ruled eternity. Is this what rest looks like? As if sensing the question, not the words but the shape of it, Hades speaks again. This is one place, he says. You nod. Not a conclusion, just a beginning. He stands slowly, brushing a bit of sand from his cloak. It falls away easily, like it knows it doesn't belong there. You stand too. The sun is shifted lower now, the light softer, less intense. The sky beginning to change in subtle ways, colors blending gently at the edges. Hades looks out once more across the water. More, he says. You blink. More? Of course. A vacation, apparently, is not just sitting in one place. It's exploring, experiencing, possibly confusing more humans along the way. You take one last look at the shoreline, the place where the god of the dead discovered sunlight, sand, and mildly stressful social interactions, and then you follow him, away from the sea, toward whatever comes next. Because if this is how his vacation starts, you can only imagine how strange it's about to get. Section 7. You leave the shoreline behind, the sound of waves fading into a softer memory, like a song you can still hum but no longer hear. The path inland is warmer, dustier, and far less forgiving than the smooth rhythm of the beach. Your feet press into packed earth, scattered with small stones that feel like they were designed specifically to remind you that ancient roads did not believe in comfort. Hades walks ahead, steady as always, his cloak shifting slightly in the breeze. He doesn't look back, but you get the sense he knows you're there, like a constant variable in an otherwise unpredictable equation. For a while, there's only the sound of footsteps, and then a distant bark. Not just any bark, a very specific kind of bark. You stop. Hades stops. And slowly, almost reluctantly, he turns. Because there in the distance, bounding across the uneven terrain with the enthusiasm of something that absolutely did not get permission to do this, is Cerberus all three heads, all three expressions. One excited, one determined, and one that looks like it's already tired but committed anyway. You blink. No, you yes. Cerberus reaches you in seconds, skidding slightly in the dust, kicking up a cloud that feels far too lively for something that belongs in the underworld. All three heads immediately start reacting at once. One nuzzles Hades, one looks around suspiciously at everything that is not the underworld, and one sneezes. You freeze for a second. Because yes, the guardian of the underworld is apparently allergic to the surface world. That feels deeply ironic. Hades looks down at him. You were to remain, he says. Cerberus sits, then stands, then sits again. It's a full emotional argument, expressed entirely through posture. You almost feel like you're watching a dog say, I understand your instructions, but I have chosen to ignore them. Hades exhales. Not annoyed, just resigned. A widely known mythological detail slips into your thoughts. Cerberus was meant to prevent souls from escaping the underworld and the living from entering, which raises a very important question. Who exactly is guarding the gate right now? You glance back instinctively, as if expecting to see a line of confused souls just casually walking out like, oh, are we free to go now? Fortunately, or unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening. Historians still debate whether Cerberus was ever truly alone in his duty, or if other forces helped maintain the boundaries of the underworld. Either way, this is probably not standard procedure. Hades places a hand briefly on one of Cerberus's heads again. You will stay, he repeats. Cerberus does not move. All three heads look at him, unblinking, determined. This is happening. You look between them. This feels like a standoff, but one where only one side has three perspectives. Hades studies him for a moment longer. And then, you will accompany, he says. You blink. Cerberus perks up instantly. All three heads. Tail, if it had one you could see clearly, would absolutely be wagging. You almost laugh. So that's it. The guardian of the underworld is now on vacation. This is already going extremely well. Cerberus circles once, then settles near Hades, clearly satisfied with this outcome. You can't help but think, somewhere deep in the underworld, something just became slightly less supervised. Probably fine. Probably. You continue walking, now with significantly more presence in your group. Cerberus moves beside you, occasionally darting ahead, then back again, like he's trying to process the concept of new smells. And there are a lot of smells: grass, dust, warm air, distant animals. He pauses suddenly, all three heads lifting at once. You follow his gaze, a herd of goats in the distance. Cerberus freezes. The goats freeze. There's a moment of mutual confusion. You hold your breath. This could go very wrong very quickly. Cerberus takes one step forward. The goats scatter instantly. Chaos. Pure, immediate chaos. Cerberus watches them go, all three heads tilting in slightly different directions, as if trying to understand why everything just ran away. Inefficient, Hades says calmly. You almost choke on your own laughter. That's your third joke for this section, delivered with perfect timing. Cerberus looks back at Hades, mildly offended, as if to say, I was just saying hello. You continue on, the path leading toward a more settled area now, signs of human life becoming more frequent. Worn tracks, low stone walls, the faint outline of structures in the distance. A village. This is where things might get complicated. Hades slows slightly. Not hesitation. Assessment. He watches the movement ahead, people walking, carrying goods, talking in small clusters. They gather, he says. Yes, you think. We do that too. A well-known historical fact. Ancient Greek villages were often small, tightly connected communities where everyone knew, or at least thought they knew, everyone else. Which means introducing a mysterious, silent traveler with a three-headed dog is not exactly low profile. You glance at Cerberus. This is not going to be subtle. Historians still debate how villagers would have interpreted strange travelers, whether with hospitality, suspicion, or a mix of both. But one thing is certain, no one expects Cerberus. You approach the edge of the village. A woman carrying a clay jar looks up first. She stops. The jar tilts slightly. Water spills. No one notices, because now everyone is noticing. You feel it ripple outward, the awareness, the sudden shift in attention. Hades stands calmly. Cerberus stands beside him, three heads, very visible, very real. Silence spreads. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in the underworld, not empty, but full of reaction. You think, well, this is new. Hades looks at the people. Not threatening, not welcoming, just present. And you realize this might be the first time in a very long time that the world of the living is looking directly at something it cannot explain, and not immediately looking away. Section 8. The silence doesn't break all at once. It loosens, like a rope being slowly untied. You stand there with him at the edge of the village, and the people, farmers, traders, someone still holding that tilted jar, begin to move again, but carefully now. Voices return in fragments, a whisper here, a cautious step there. No one runs, which feels impressive considering the situation includes a very calm god and a very visible three-headed dog. Hades does not announce himself. He simply walks forward, and because you've come this far, you follow. Cerberus pads alongside, each head taking turns scanning the surroundings like three slightly overenthusiastic security guards who didn't receive a proper briefing. A well-known detail drifts into your thoughts as you pass between low stone walls and sun-warmed homes. In ancient Greece, xenia, the code of hospitality, was a serious thing. Travelers were often welcomed, fed, and given shelter because any stranger might be a god in disguise. Ironically, today the god is not in disguise, and that might be the only reason this is working. A man steps forward, older, steady, the kind of presence that suggests he's used to making decisions when things get uncertain. He studies Hades for a long moment. Then, carefully, you travel far. Hades inclines his head. Yes, the man nods, processing that extremely minimal amount of information. You will need water, not a question, an offering. You almost feel a quiet relief ripple through the air. There it is, hospitality, doing its job like a social safety net woven over centuries. Hades pauses, considering. Then yes. Short answers seem to be his vacation personality. The man gestures and someone brings a cup, simple clay, slightly uneven. You notice how their hands tremble just a little. Not fear exactly, but awareness. That same instinct again. Hades takes the cup. He studies it for a moment, like it's a small, fascinating artifact. Then he drinks. You watch closely. Because yes, the god of the dead is currently hydrating. He lowers the cup. Acceptable, he says. You look away quickly, pretending you didn't almost laugh. That's the driest beverage review in history. Cerberus leans in immediately, three heads converging toward the cup with intense interest. No, Hades says. All three heads freeze. Then one of them sighs. You didn't know dogs could sigh like that, but apparently mythological ones can. Nearby, a few children have gathered at a safer distance. They're staring openly, curiosity outweighing caution. One whispers, "What is that?" Another whispers back, "Three dogs," which is technically incorrect but emotionally understandable. Hades notices them. They observe, he says quietly. Yes, you think, and they're going to remember this forever. A lesser-known detail comes to mind. In many Greek communities, stories and myths weren't just told. They were experienced, shaped by encounters, retold around fires. Moments like this could become legends, slightly exaggerated, slightly misunderstood. You can already imagine it. I saw a traveler with a beast of three heads. It had four heads. It breathed fire. It asked for water politely. That last one might confuse future historians. Speaking of which, historians still debate how often mythological encounters were believed to happen in everyday life versus being symbolic storytelling. But standing here now, you'd say the line between myth and reality feels very thin. The man who welcomed you steps closer again. You may rest here, he offers. Hades considers. You notice that pause again, that quiet internal calculation he always seems to make. Briefly, he says, that feels like progress. You move into the village, guided toward a shaded area where the ground is cooler and the air carries the faint scent of olives and dry herbs. Hades sits. Of course he does. At this point, sitting seems to be his main vacation activity, and honestly, it's going well. Cerberus lies down beside him, all three heads settling at slightly different angles, like a very complicated cushion arrangement. The villagers keep their distance, but not as much now. Curiosity is winning. A woman approaches slowly, holding a small basket, figs. You tense slightly. Fruit, dangerous precedent. She offers them with both hands. For your journey. Hades looks at the figs, then at her, then back at the figs. You can practically hear the mythological history echoing in the background. Pomegranate seeds, binding agreements, seasonal consequences. This feels like a moment. He reaches out, takes one, examines it, and then he eats it. You freeze internally. Wait, is that allowed? Is this going to trigger something? A seasonal shift? A cosmic contract? A very awkward return policy? Nothing happens. The world remains stable. The sky does not crack open. Cerberus does not gain a fourth head. You exhale. Okay, good. Hades nods slightly. Acceptable, he says again. Apparently everything is acceptable today. The woman smiles, relieved, proud, slightly confused. You glance around. The village has relaxed just a little. People return to their tasks, though with frequent glances back. Conversations resume, now filled with quiet speculation. You catch fragments. From the south, the animal. Did you see? It spreads quickly. Not fear, story. Hades sits in the shade, calm as ever, watching it all unfold. They create meaning, he says. Yes, you think. Even when they don't understand. He nods. That seems to make sense to him. The sun shifts again, light softening as the day begins its slow descent. Shadows lengthen, stretching across the ground like time made visible. You feel it, that gentle slowing, that quiet settling. Hades leans back slightly, eyes moving across the village, the people, the small, ordinary details of life continuing. No grand events, no divine interventions, just living. And for a moment you realize something quietly remarkable. No one here knows they are hosting the god of the dead, and he seems perfectly fine with that. No need for recognition, no need for fear, just presence, just observation, just rest. Cerberus shifts beside him, one head already half asleep, another still alert, the third watching a passing chicken with deep philosophical interest. You suppress a smile. Because yes, the guardian of the underworld is currently contemplating poultry. Vacation is working. The air grows cooler as evening approaches, and with it comes a subtle change in energy, slower movements, softer voices, the beginning of rest. Hades notices. They end, he says. For the day, you add. He considers that, then nods. Temporary endings, followed by returns. A cycle, not so different from what he knows. And as you sit there beside him in a village that will remember this day in ways it can't quite explain, you realize the world above is not just something Hades is observing. It's something he's beginning, slowly, quietly, to understand. Section 9. Evening settles over the village like a soft exhale, the kind that doesn't announce itself but slowly changes everything. The warmth fades into something gentler, shadows stretch longer, and the sky begins its quiet transition, gold melting into amber, then into that deepening blue that always feels like a promise of rest. You sit beside him still, the sounds of the village lowering in volume, like someone gradually turning down the world. Hades notices immediately. They withdraw, he says. You nod. Yes, we call it night. He considers that, watching as people begin to gather their things, doors closing, small fires being lit. The rhythm is clear, activity giving way to stillness, motion to pause. A widely known detail comes to mind. In ancient Greek life, nighttime wasn't just about sleep. It was a time for storytelling, for quiet conversation, for reflection. Without artificial light, the world naturally slowed, aligning itself with the cycles of the sun. Hades watches a small fire flicker to life nearby. It fades, he says. Everything does, you think. He doesn't respond to that, but you notice he keeps watching the flame. It moves constantly, never still, yet always anchored to the same place. A strange balance of change and consistency, something that probably feels familiar to a god who oversees eternity. Cerberus shifts beside you, all three heads adjusting as the temperature drops slightly. One curls inward, one rests flat against the ground. The third remains alert, though even it seems calmer now. You glance at him. This is new for you too, isn't it? Cerberus huffs softly, which you decide to interpret as yes. A few villagers sit nearby, their voices low, relaxed now that the tension of the unknown has softened into curiosity. One begins telling a story. You catch fragments, something about a traveler, something about the sea, something about a strange animal. You look at Hades. He's listening, not obviously, but you can tell. They recount, he says quietly. Yes. Another lesser-known detail surfaces. Oral storytelling was central to Greek culture. Myths weren't static, they evolved, shaped by each telling, each listener, each moment. What begins as a simple observation can become something far larger over time. You wonder what this story will become. Three-headed beast, the storyteller says softly. A child gasps. You glance at Cerberus. One of his heads lifts slightly as if recognizing the subject matter. Kind traveler, you almost laugh. That's already a generous interpretation. Historians still debate how myths shifted across regions and generations, how much was preserved, how much transformed. Sitting here now, you're watching it happen in real time, reality becoming story, story becoming memory. Hades listens for a moment longer, then looks away. They simplify, he says. Yes, you think. We always do. Because the truth is often too complex, too quiet, too subtle. It's easier to turn it into something clear, something memorable, something that makes sense. The fire crackles softly, the sky darkens further, stars begin to appear, faint at first, then more, scattered across the vastness above. Hades looks up, and this time he doesn't just observe, he pauses, for longer than before. It is not empty, he says. You follow his gaze. No, you think. It never is. A well-known historical detail. Ancient Greeks saw the night sky as deeply meaningful, mapping constellations into stories, heroes, gods, creatures frozen in time above them. The sky wasn't just space, it was narrative. Hades studies it carefully. You placed meaning there, he says. Not me personally, you think, but yes. He nods slightly. Another system, another structure. Different from the underworld, but not entirely unfamiliar. You lie back on the ground, the coolness of the earth replacing the warmth of the day. The stars feel distant, but also close in a strange way, like something you can't reach, but can still be part of. Hades remains seated for a moment longer. Then he does it again. He lies back. You turn your head slightly, watching him, the god of the dead on his back, looking at the stars like someone who has just discovered that the sky exists. It extends, he says. You smile softly. Yes. A shooting star crosses the sky. Quick. Gone. You don't say anything, but you notice Hades follow it, just slightly, just enough to show he saw it. Cerberus lifts one head, watching the same path, then settles again, apparently deciding that chasing stars is not within his current job description. The village grows quieter, voices fade, fires dim, one by one lights disappear, until there's mostly darkness. but not the same darkness as the underworld. This one is softer, layered, alive in its own way. Hades notices. This darkness is different, he says. Yes, you think, it rests. He considers that, then nods. Resting darkness. That might be his favorite concept so far. You feel your own body relax slightly, the stillness of the night settling in. The air cool, the sounds minimal, the world no longer asking anything from anyone. For a moment, nothing happens, and that's the point. Hades doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He simply exists in this space between activity and absence, between day and night, between responsibility and something else. You glance at him again. He looks not different exactly, but quieter, as if something inside him has adjusted, not changed, just shifted. A small, subtle recalibration. You think about the underworld, the constant flow, the endless arrival of souls, the unbroken rhythm of duty. And then you think about this pause, this stillness, this moment where nothing is required. You wonder how long it's been since he's had that. Maybe longer than even he can measure. The stars continue their silent pattern above. The village sleeps. Cerberus breathes slowly beside you, all three heads finally at rest, and you lie there next to the god of the dead, in a world that is alive and quiet and temporary, realizing that for the first time in a very long time, Hades is not watching over anything. He's just here. Section 10. Morning arrives gently, not with urgency, but with a slow, golden persistence that seeps into everything. You feel it before you see it, the subtle warmth returning, the faint shift in air, the quiet suggestion that the world is beginning again whether anyone is ready or not. Hades is already awake. Of course he is. Sleep, for him, seems more like a concept than a necessity. He sits where he was, looking out toward the horizon, where the sky is gradually brightening. Cerberus, however, is very much experiencing morning in a more relatable way. One head awake, one half awake, and one still completely committed to sleep. You stretch slightly, the ground cool beneath you. The village begins to stir. Doors open, footsteps return. Voices rise, soft at first, then clearer. They resume, Hades says. You nod. Yes, every day. A widely known historical detail. Daily life in ancient Greek villages followed natural rhythms. Sunrise meant work, movement, activity. There was no snooze button, no 5 more minutes, just light and expectation. Hades watches as people begin their routines, carrying water, tending animals, preparing food. They repeat, he observes. Yes, you think. But we don't usually complain about it out loud, at least not back then. He tilts his head slightly, as if analyzing the concept of repetition outside the underworld. Because here, repetition isn't eternal, it's cyclical. That seems to matter. A man passes by carrying a bundle of tools. He nods toward Hades, brief, respectful, still a little uncertain. Hades nods back. You pause. That's new. The god of the dead just returned, a casual morning greeting. Progress. Cerberus finally wakes fully, all three heads lifting in sequence like a slightly delayed system reboot. He sniffs the air immediately, processing the morning like it's an entirely new world, which, to be fair, it kind of is. He stands, stretches, and then notices a chicken. Again. The same chicken from last night, or possibly a different one with identical confidence. Cerberus freezes. The chicken does not. It walks past him like it has absolutely no awareness of mythological danger. You hold your breath. Cerberus leans slightly forward. The chicken pecks at the ground, unbothered. After a moment, Cerberus sits back down, defeated. You try not to laugh, because yes, the guardian of the underworld has been socially outmatched by poultry. Hades watches this. Inefficient, he says again. There it is. Consistency. You smile. A lesser-known detail comes to mind. In ancient Greece, domestic animals like chickens were common in village life, valued for eggs, ritual use, and occasionally for waking people up at times they did not request. You glance at Hades. This is part of it, you think. The small things. He seems to understand that. The village grows busier now, movement everywhere, purpose in every direction. Hades stands slowly, observing. They begin again, he says. Yes. You pause, and they will end again too. He considers that, then nods. Balance. That word doesn't need to be spoken. It's already there. Historians still debate how ancient Greeks perceived time, whether as linear, cyclical, or something more complex. But watching this now, you'd say it feels like a loop with variation. The same structure, different details. Hades steps forward, moving through the village once more. This time, the reactions are different. Less tension, more curiosity. A child waves. actually waves. You blink. Hades looks at the child, and then he lifts his hand slightly, a small, almost uncertain motion, but unmistakable. A wave. You look away quickly, baffled because that might be the most unexpected development so far. The child grins and runs off, clearly convinced this is the best morning ever. You think, well, that's going to become a story. Hades lowers his hand, expression unchanged, as if he did not just participate in casual human interaction. They respond, he says. Yes, you think, positively. He nods. Noted. You continue walking, moving toward the edge of the village again. The sun is higher now, the light stronger, shadows shorter. The world feels more active, more defined, less quiet, more alive. Hades pauses at the edge, looking back once, not lingering, just observing. They continue without awareness, he says. You nod. That's kind of the point. Life doesn't stop to acknowledge everything that exists around it. It just goes on. He turns away and begins walking again, away from the village. Cerberus follows immediately, clearly having decided that vacation companion is now his permanent role. You follow too, leaving behind the place that briefly, unknowingly hosted something far beyond its understanding. As you move along the path, the landscape opens again. Fields, low hills, scattered trees bending slightly in the breeze. The air feels different now. Not new, but familiar, in a growing way. Hades walks steadily, but you notice something subtle. He's not just observing anymore. He's remembering. Not the underworld, but this. The beach, the village, the night sky, the small interactions, the quiet moments. They're settling somewhere within him, like something being carefully placed rather than simply noticed and discarded. You wonder what that means. For a god who has existed in one domain for so long, what does it do to experience something else? He slows slightly, not stopping, just adjusting, as if the pace itself is changing. This is varied, he says. You smile. Yes. That might be the simplest and most accurate summary of the mortal world. Varied, unpredictable, sometimes inefficient, occasionally confusing, often loud, but also strangely meaningful. You walk beside him, the path stretching ahead into more unknown, more moments, more observations waiting to happen. And you realize this isn't just a vacation anymore. It's becoming something else, something quieter, something deeper, something that even Hades might not have expected. Section 11. You keep walking beside him as the morning stretches into something brighter and more active. The land unfolding in gentle waves of fields and low hills. The path is uneven but clear enough, like it has been walked so many times it no longer needs explanation. Hades slows slightly. Not because he's tired, he doesn't do tired, but because something ahead has caught his attention. You follow his gaze, a gathering. Not a village this time, but something more. Intentional. People moving toward a central space, carrying items, wearing expressions that are more focused than casual. There's structure here. Purpose. A festival. You glance at Hades. This might be a lot. He studies the scene. They assemble with intent, he says. Yes, you think, and possibly noise. Definitely noise. As you approach, the sounds become clearer, voices layered over each other, music in the distance, the rhythmic beat of something being struck repeatedly. Not chaotic exactly, but close. A widely known historical detail, festivals in ancient Greece were often held in honor of gods, celebrations involving music, offerings, competitions, and rituals. They weren't quiet affairs. They were meant to be seen, heard, and remembered. Which raises an interesting question. What happens when a god accidentally attends one? You step into the outer edge of the gathering. No one stops you. No one questions you. Because right now, everyone is focused on the event itself. Cerberus, however, immediately becomes a problem. 3 heads. Very noticeable. He pauses, uncertain, as if trying to process the sudden increase in humans, sound, and general excitement. One head looks intrigued. One looks overwhelmed. One looks like it's considering leaving. You can relate. Hades continues forward, unbothered, his presence cutting through the crowd in that quiet, steady way of his. People shift slightly as he passes, not consciously, not dramatically, but enough to make space. They adjust, he says again. Yes, you think, even in chaos. You move deeper into the festival. There are tables with food, bread, olives, fruit, people laughing, musicians playing something lively enough that it feels like the opposite of the underworld in every possible way. Hades watches it all. They amplify, he says. That's one way to describe it. Another might be humans taking normal behavior and turning the volume up. A group nearby is dancing, not gracefully, not in perfect rhythm, but enthusiastically. You glance at Hades. He watches them with the same calm focus he gives everything. They move without necessity, he observes. You smile. Yes, for enjoyment. He considers that. For no outcome? Sometimes the outcome is just feeling something. He nods slowly. That seems to require a moment of processing. A lesser-known detail surfaces. Not all Greek festivals were solemn. Many were lively, even chaotic, involving music, wine, and performances. Some honored gods like Dionysus, where celebration itself was the point. You look around. This definitely feels like one of those, which makes Hades' presence here even more ironic. The god of the dead, standing in the middle of a celebration of life. Historians still debate how participants experience these festivals, whether as religious duty, social gathering, or something closer to emotional release. But watching now, you'd say it's all of the above. A man stumbles slightly nearby, laughing louder than necessary. Cerberus watches him carefully. Suspicious. You think, yes, that's correct. Be suspicious of that one. Hades steps closer to a central area where offerings are being placed. Small items, food, objects left with intention. He stops, observes. They give, he says. Yes, to be received. Yes. He looks at the offerings for a long moment. There's something familiar there. Different context. Same structure. In the underworld, offerings were made too. Libations poured, rituals for honor or appease. Different world. Similar patterns. He kneels slightly, examining one item more closely, a small carved figure. Simple. Carefully made. You watch him. This is important to them, you think. He nods. Yes. That word again. Simple. Nearby, someone begins playing a faster rhythm. The energy shifts. More movement, more sound, more everything. Cerberus reacts immediately. All three heads lift. Ears, if you can call them that, alert. This is a lot. He looks at Hades, then at you, then back at Hades, as if asking, is this safe? Hades places a hand briefly on one of his heads. It is temporary, he says. Cerberus seems to accept that, which is impressive. You wish you could process loud environments that efficiently. A woman passes by, offering a cup to Hades. Wine. You freeze internally again. This feels like another test. He takes it. Of course he does. Examines it, then drinks. You wait. Nothing happens. No cosmic shift. No sudden transformation. Just acceptable, he says. You almost laugh out loud. At this point, acceptable might be the highest praise anything can receive. The woman smiles, clearly pleased, and moves on. You glance at Hades. You're adapting, you think. He doesn't respond directly. But there's a subtle shift. He's not just observing anymore. He's participating in small ways. But still, that matters. The music continues. The dancing continues. The laughter continues. And for a moment you see something you didn't expect. Hades, still. Not separate, not distant, just present within it. Not part of the chaos, but not outside it either. Balanced. A quiet center in a loud world. You stand there beside him. The energy of the festival moving around you like a current. And you realize, this might be the most unusual thing of all. Not that Hades came here. Not that he's watching. But that he's beginning, in his own calm, measured way, to belong in a place he was never meant to be. Section 12. You drift with him out of the thickest part of the festival, the music softening behind you until it becomes a distant rhythm again. Still present, but no longer pressing against your thoughts. The air feels calmer here, as if the land itself prefers a quieter version of events. Hades slows. Not to observe people this time, but to listen. You notice it immediately. The subtle tilt of his head, the way his attention turns inward rather than outward. It's different from before. Less curiosity, more awareness. Something is off. Not in the world of the living. Somewhere else. Far below. You feel it too, faintly. Not a sound, not exactly a sensation, more like the absence of something that should be there. A rhythm missing a beat. Hades stops completely. The underworld, he says. It's the first time he's spoken about it since leaving. You wait. It continues, he adds, which sounds reassuring, but also incomplete. A widely known detail about Greek mythology surfaces. The underworld is not just a place, it's a system. Souls arrive, are judged, are guided. Rivers must be crossed, boundaries maintained. It doesn't require constant intervention, but it does require presence. And right now, its ruler is standing in a quiet field, holding a cup of wine that he has already described as acceptable. You glance at him. Is something wrong? You wonder. He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he looks down at the ground beneath your feet, at the earth, at the layer that separates this world from his. They adjust, he says slowly. You recognize the word. He's been using it for humans. Now he's using it for the underworld. That feels significant. A lesser-known detail comes to mind. In some interpretations, the underworld was not a chaotic place, but an ordered one, structured, stable, governed by rules that rarely changed, which means if something does shift, it matters. Cerberus lifts his heads all at once. All three. No confusion this time, no curiosity, recognition. He lets out a low sound, not a growl, not quite a whine, something in between. You feel a small chill, not from the air, from the implication. Historians still debate how autonomous the underworld was believed to be, whether it could function independently or require divine oversight. But standing here now, you'd say it's trying to maintain itself, without its king. Hades remains still, calm. Of course he is, but there's something new in that calm. Focus. They compensate, he says. You nod slowly. For your absence. Yes. There's no panic, no urgency, just understanding. But that doesn't make it insignificant. A breeze passes through the field, bending the grass slightly, carrying with it the distant echoes of the festival behind you. Two worlds, two rhythms, both continuing, both adapting. You look at him. Do you need to go back? You think. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he takes a step forward, then another, moving again, but not toward the underworld. Forward, still on this path. This is temporary, he says. You recognize that phrase. He said it to Cerberus. Now he's saying it to himself. And maybe to the underworld. You walk beside him again, the tension easing slightly but not disappearing entirely. It lingers like a quiet reminder that even eternity has structure, and structure doesn't always like change. The landscape shifts gradually as you move, fields giving way to rougher ground, stones more frequent, the air a little cooler again. Hades watches everything. But now there's a layer beneath that observation, awareness of something distant, something ongoing, something waiting. Cerberus stays closer this time, not darting ahead, not exploring, staying, as if he too understands that this is no longer just a journey outward. There's a connection pulling gently in the opposite direction. You glance at Hades again. He doesn't look troubled, but he looks anchored to both places, which is probably not a comfortable position for anyone, even a god. A widely known mythological event comes to mind. When Persephone was taken to the underworld, her absence caused imbalance in the world above. Her mother Demeter withdrew, and the earth itself suffered. Balance. It always comes back to that. When something leaves its place, something else changes. You wonder, what is changing now? Not dramatically, not visibly, but subtly, quietly, like a system adjusting in the background. Hades stops once more. This time he looks not at the ground, not at the horizon, but at nothing in particular. Just forward. They will continue, he says. You nod. Yes, but not indefinitely. There it is, the limit. Even something as vast as the underworld has thresholds. You don't feel alarm, but you feel awareness, the kind that comes before a decision. Cerberus shifts beside him, one head pressing lightly against his side. Grounding. You didn't expect that, but it fits. Hades places a hand on his head again briefly. A quiet exchange, no words, no need. You stand there with them, in a world that is warm, alive, and moving forward, while another world, far below, continues without him. For now. The breeze passes again, the light shifts slightly, time continues, and you realize this moment, this pause between staying and returning, might be the most important part of the journey so far. Because for the first time, Hades is not just experiencing something new, he's deciding how long he can. Section 13. You continue beside him, the air quieter now, as if even the world senses that something subtle has shifted. The festival is far behind, the village a memory, the sea a distant echo. What remains is the path and the quiet tension that follows it. Hades walks steadily but not aimlessly. There is direction now, not fully decided but present. You feel it in the way he moves, less wandering, more weighing. Ahead, the land begins to rise slightly, forming a ridge that overlooks both fields and distant settlements. From here you can see far. Not everything, but enough to understand the shape of things. Hades stops at the crest. You stand beside him. Below, life continues in scattered patterns, small figures moving, smoke rising from distant homes, the faint suggestion of roads connecting everything together. Above, the sky stretches wide and indifferent. Between them, you and him. And a decision that hasn't quite formed into words yet. They persist, he says. You nod? Yes. Life goes on, always, whether watched or not. A widely known mythological detail returns to your thoughts. The gods of Olympus often interfered in human affairs, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. But Hades was different. He rarely intervened in the world of the living. His role was separate, contained. And now he has stepped outside that boundary. Historians still debate whether Hades' distance from Olympus and the mortal world made him more impartial or simply more isolated. Looking at him now, you might say, both. Cerberus sits beside him, all three heads facing forward, unusually still. Even he seems to understand that this is not a moment for chasing chickens or evaluating goats, just stillness. Hades looks down at the land again. Then, slowly, he speaks. They do not require me. You pause. That's true. In the world above, life continues without him. No one here depends on his presence. No one even knows it. You nod. Yes. There's no disappointment in his tone, no resentment, just recognition. Then he adds, but they require structure. You glance at him. There it is again, the underworld, not mentioned directly, but present, always present. A lesser-known detail comes to mind. In Greek belief, the underworld wasn't chaotic. It was ordered, governed, balanced. Souls had places, paths, outcomes. Without that structure, things would not stop, but they might unravel. You shift your weight slightly. Is it changing, you wonder? Hades doesn't answer directly. Instead, he looks toward the horizon, toward something you cannot see. They adjust, he says again. The word feels different this time, heavier, less observational, more personal. Cerberus lets out a low sound, not loud, but enough. A reminder. You follow Hades' gaze. There's nothing visible, no crack in the sky. No sign of disturbance, just distance. But sometimes, distance is where change begins. A breeze moves across the ridge, cooler than before, the kind that signals transition. You feel it brush past you, carrying the faint scent of earth and something deeper, something older. Hades closes his eyes for a brief moment. Not long, just enough. When he opens them again, there's clarity. This is sufficient, he says. You recognize the phrase. He said it at the beach. But this time, it means something different. Not satisfaction, completion. You take a slow breath. So it's time. He doesn't say yes. He doesn't need to. The decision has already been made. A widely known mythological theme surfaces. Gods, like mortals, are bound by their roles. They may step away briefly, but their domains are part of them, inseparable. Hades is not just visiting the underworld. He is the underworld, and it is calling him back. Historians still debate whether the gods experience duty as obligation or identity. But watching him now, it feels less like something he has to return to, and more like something he is returning to. Cerberus stands, all three heads alerty, no hesitation. Vacation mode, over. You almost expect a dramatic moment, a speech, a final look. But Hades is not that kind of god. He turns and begins to walk. Back, not rushed, not reluctant, just certain. You follow. Of course you do. The path feels different now. Not new, not unfamiliar, but reversed. Each step carrying a sense of direction that wasn't there before. You pass through the same landscapes, the fields, the stones, the quiet stretches of land that once felt exploratory. Now they feel transitional, like pages being turned back. The light begins to shift again, the sun lowering slightly, casting longer shadows. Time is moving, and so are you. Hades doesn't look back, not at the ridge, not at the distant villages, not at the world he has just experienced. But you notice something. He doesn't forget it either. It's there, carried, quietly, as part of him now. Cerberus stays close, moving in sync, no longer distracted by the unfamiliar, focused, purposeful. The air grows cooler as you continue, subtly, gradually, until you feel it, that familiar shift, the boundary, still ahead, still waiting. Hades slows slightly as you approach, not hesitation, recognition. You stand at the edge once more, the place where light fades into something softer, deeper, more still. He pauses, just for a moment, then this was varied, he says. You smile softly. Yes. That word again. Simple, but enough. He steps forward, and this time there is no uncertainty, only return. Habit section 14. You cross the boundary with him, and the world shifts again, softly, almost politely, as if the underworld has been waiting without wanting to interrupt. The warmth fades first, then the color, then the layered sounds of life above, until everything settles back into that familiar, steady stillness. Not empty, never empty, just quiet in a way that feels complete. Hades walks forward, and the ground beneath your feet returns to that strange, memory-like texture, firm but never entirely fixed. The air cools, carrying that faint mineral weight you've come to recognize as something like permanence. Cerberus slows, then stops. All three heads lift at once. You feel it too. The difference. The underworld hasn't changed dramatically, no chaos, no collapse, but something subtle has shifted, like a system that has been running without supervision and is now adjusting back. They maintained, Hades says. You nod. They did. A widely known detail comes to mind. The underworld was governed not just by Hades, but by figures like judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, Aeacus, who helped maintain order. It wasn't a one-god operation, even if Hades was its center. Still, the center matters. Historians still debate how autonomous the underworld truly was, but standing here now, you can feel it. It held, but it's relieved. Cerberus moves forward suddenly, bounding ahead with renewed purpose. This time, there's no hesitation, no curiosity, just certainty. He reaches the familiar gates and resumes his position almost instantly, all three heads aligning into that vigilant, watchful stance. Back on duty. Vacation officially over. You almost expect him to look back. He doesn't. Professional. Hades watches him for a moment, then nods. A small gesture, but enough. You continue deeper, passing through the quiet expanses, the fields, the distant figures of souls moving in their slow, endless patterns. And now something feels different. Not in the underworld, in him. Hades walks as he always has, steady, composed, but there's a subtle shift. Not lighter, not heavier, just more aware, as if something has been added, not taken. You think back. The sea, the village, the festival, the stars, all those small, quiet moments, they're here now, with him. A lesser-known detail surfaces. While Hades is often portrayed as detached, some interpretations suggest he was one of the more reasonable and balanced gods, not cruel, not chaotic, but firm and fair. Watching him now, you might add something else, observant, and now experienced. You move through a corridor of stone, the echo soft, controlled, familiar again. No wind, no sunlight, no distant laughter, but also no discomfort. This place is not harsh, it simply is. Hades slows as you approach a central space, a kind of threshold within the underworld itself, where paths converge, where movement feels more structured. He stops, looks around. Everything is as it should be, souls moving, rivers flowing, silence holding. But now he notices more. They continue, he says. You nod. Yes, just like the world above. Different rhythm, same persistence. He turns slightly, his gaze moving across the space, not searching, not checking, just acknowledging. And then he steps forward, back into his place. Not a throne in the dramatic sense, no grand gesture, just position, presence, and immediately you feel it, the shift, subtle but complete. The underworld settles, not because it was unstable, but because it is whole again. Cerberus lets out a low, satisfied sound from the distance, somewhere. Somewhere a faint ripple passes through the realm, not visible, not audible, but real. Balance restored. A widely known mythological idea echoes in your thoughts. The gods represent forces, not just personalities. When they are present, those forces are aligned. When they are absent, things adjust, but not perfectly. Now, everything aligns again. Hades stands still for a moment, then speaks. It remains. You smile slightly. Yes, it always does. But now, so does something else. The memory of sunlight, the sound of waves, the rhythm of human voices, the quiet of resting darkness. They don't belong here, but they're not gone either. They exist within him. You glance at him. He doesn't show it, not openly, but you know. Because you were there, you saw it. The pause, the curiosity, the understanding, and maybe just a little, the appreciation. He turns slightly, not toward you exactly, but enough. This was instructive, he says. You nod. That's one way to put it. Probably the most Hades-approved way. A quiet moment passes. The underworld continues around you, unchanged, and yet not entirely the same, because its ruler has returned with something new, not visible, not measurable, but real. And you realize this wasn't just a vacation. It was a reminder that even in a place of endings, there can be moments, quiet, simple, fleeting moments that feel like something else entirely. Section 15. You remain there with him as the underworld settles into its familiar rhythm again, slow, steady, unbroken. It feels almost as if nothing happened at all, as if the brief absence, the journey, the sunlight, the sea, were just a passing thought in an endless timeline. But you know better, because something has changed. Not the structure, not the order, but the way it is, held. Hades stands where he belongs, not out of obligation, but alignment. The space around him feels complete again, like a circle quietly closing without needing to announce it. They continue, he says once more. You nod. Yes. It's a phrase that now carries two worlds, above, below, life, and what follows it. A widely known detail returns to your mind. In Greek belief, the boundary between life and death was absolute, but the understanding of it was not. The living imagined the underworld, the dead inhabited it, and the gods connected both. Hades looks out across his domain where souls move in their quiet, endless patterns. They arrive, he says, and they always will, you think. There's no fear in that, just truth. A lesser-known detail surfaces gently. Not all souls in Greek myth were judged harshly. Many simply existed in a neutral state, neither punished nor rewarded. The afterlife wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just continuation. You feel that now. Not as something heavy, but as something steady. Cerberus, back at his post, shifts slightly, all three heads alert again but calm, no longer curious about chickens, no longer distracted by unfamiliar sounds. Just present. You almost miss the chaos. Almost. Historians still debate how the Greeks reconciled the idea of death as both an end and a transition. But standing here, you sense it clearly. It's not one or the other. It's both. Hades turns slightly, his gaze moving. Not searching, not questioning, just aware. And then he pauses, not because something is wrong, but because something is remembered. You see it in the smallest way, the faintest stillness, the slightest shift, the kind that only exists when a moment echoes, the sea, the warmth, the stars, the quiet laughter of people who didn't know he was there. They don't belong here, but they are not gone. They are varied, he says softly. You smile. Yes, the same word. But now it bridges everything. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. Some things are understood without being explained. You stand beside him, feeling the stillness of the underworld, the steady presence of something that does not rush, does not change quickly, does not forget. And yet, you know it has changed. Just a little, just enough. Because now, within this place of endings, there is also memory of beginnings, of movement, of life continuing without awareness, of moments that don't last, but still matter. Hades takes a slow step forward, then another, resuming, not restarting, continuing, as he always has, but not exactly as before. You follow for a while longer, through the quiet paths, past the distant rivers, alongside the steady flow of souls that never truly stops. There's no urgency here, no need to hurry. Everything happens in its time, even understanding, even change. And slowly, almost without noticing, the rhythm of the underworld begins to feel calming, predictable, gentle in its own way. The kind of stillness that doesn't press against you, but supports you. You feel your thoughts soften, your awareness drift slightly, the edges of everything becoming less sharp, less defined. Hades continues his watch, not as a burden, but as something that simply is. Cerberus remains at the gate, steady and certain. The souls move in quiet patterns. The darkness rests, and you begin to feel the weight of the journey easing, like a long breath finally exhaled. The memory of sunlight fades into something warm but distant. The sound of waves becomes softer, like an echo you no longer need to follow. The voices of the living drift away, replaced by the gentle quiet of this place. Nothing demands your attention now. Nothing pulls you forward. You can simply be. Hades does not speak again. He doesn't need to. Everything that needed to be understood has been. The underworld holds steady. The world above continues. And somewhere between them, there is balance. You let your focus soften even more, the details around you becoming less important, the sense of presence becoming more like a feeling than a place. Calm, still, safe in its own quiet way. And as the last traces of the journey settle into silence, you feel yourself drifting. Not away, not lost, just resting. Like the world has gently dimmed its lights for you. Like everything is exactly where it should be. And there is nothing left to do but close your eyes and let the stillness carry you. Open quote, open quote, open quote, end of script, sweet dreams, close quote, close quote, close quote.